Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Killer Frequency, and I'm going to try to figure out what horror movie this actually reminds me of. The story of Killer Frequency is something out of a horror movie from the 1980s. You play as a person who's moved to a small town to take a job at a radio station. So you're this fish out of water trope, and you're kind of learning about the town as the game goes along. There's a lot of history to this town, and there are a few kind of dark secrets in it. It's a little bit Nightmare on Elm Street, a little bit Scream, and a little bit I Know What You Did Last Summer. At the start of your shift, you get a very video game explanation of why the 911 caller has to route all 911 calls to your radio station. The sheriff has been killed. The other police officer that is not on vacation is knocked out, and the 911 operator has taken it on herself to get this police officer out of town and to get back up from one of the neighboring towns. This makes perfect sense in a video game, so I'm not really going to question it too much. During this whole thing with the 911 call, you start to hear whistling over the radio, or over the phone call, sorry. And it's revealed that there is or at least there was, a serial killer called the Whistling Man in this town. But the Whistling Man was supposed to have died 30 years ago, so it kind of feels like there's a supernatural killer that's running amok in this town. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, it's very much like a 1980s horror movie. So as the game goes on, you get more and more 911 calls for people who need your help. And you do your best to try to get them out of the situations that they're in and try to help them get away from the killer. Eventually, the killer actually starts calling into the radio station. You don't know exactly who they are right away, but it does get revealed as the game goes on. You also get a fairly interesting explanation for why the killer is able to go from place to place. That part feels an awful lot like Scream 2, where you have multiple killers, but I'll get into that later. So, spoiler alert, it turns out this whole thing is the result of a prank that has gone wrong. So, yeah, there are a bunch of different horror movies that are based on this. I think The Burning would be the one that I would point to the most, just because I like The Burning. And yeah, it's different. Actually, not really The Burning. That one is closer to Scream 2, where the killer's girlfriend is actually doing it. Whatever. I'm pretty sure I said spoiler alert, so yeah. So the story is pretty funny at times, and I'm not sure where to put this part, so I'll just briefly talk about it here. You get a few prank phone calls early on, and that sort of reminds me of Halloween 2 and a few of the other Halloween movies. But there's also this kind of jackass business owner called Ponty from Ponty's Pizza that calls in all the time, and that's pretty funny, and it sort of breaks up some of the more serious parts of the story. Overall, I like the story quite a bit, just because I like horror movies, so I kind of dig this one, and trying to figure out what horror movies are kind of being called to or being brought up in this for plot points is pretty interesting. There's also an epilogue in this game, and that kind of reveals that the killer got away, so like a lot of horror movies, there's always that tease for a potential sequel. There's not much to the gameplay here. You are just solving puzzles and answering questions. That being said, it's not bad, but there's just not a whole lot going on to it. You'll make a few dialogue choices that will guide the story in different directions, and that's where you kind of help people survive or accidentally kill them. And I accidentally killed quite a few people in this. Each time you get a 911 caller from somebody that is being stalked by the Whistling Man, you'll have to go and search the radio station that you're in to try to find some solution to their problem. Whether it's hot wiring a car, picking which friend should do what task, or helping somebody out of a maze. I know all of this sounds a little weird, but it is all explained quite well in the story of this. So, yeah, it's a first-person perspective. You wander around this radio station. You eventually get keys to open up different doors. And there are a few puzzles where you'll have to open up a safe or you'll have to swap out the fuses for a fuse box. Since this radio station is kind of like a central archive for all of the things in this town, you'll find a lot of clues to who the killer is and also to just what is going on in this town. So you'll find out a lot about the different people here as well. You also find out that the janitor was in on this whole murder that took place, and that can help you or help point to who did the crime and also who is going to be the next person killed. It's interesting, to say the least. In this radio station, you'll also be interacting with Peggy an awful lot. She's your producer. She's the person who's going to be helping you, like kind of reminding you what's happening. If you started to search for something and you need hints, she'll provide those for you. She also plays a minor role in the plot at the end, and she's one of the two characters that you actually see on screen, the other one being the Whistling Man. For the type of game that this is, I think the gameplay's fine. It gets the job done, moves you through the story, and yeah, it just works for this type of an adventure game. It's pretty fun. I like the way Killer Frequency looks. There's something about it that feels a little familiar, but I can't really put my finger on what it is exactly. At first I thought it looked similar to one of the Telltale games, but the outlines don't look as dark as some of the Telltale games did. Those adventure games had a more distinct style. The characters were in like these dark black outlines, which made them kind of stand out a little bit. Some things in Killer Frequency have this, but it isn't as prominent in one of the Telltale games. Many of the key items can be easily identified before you pick them up, so you can tell what the map looks like, you can tell what the magazine is, some of the notes you can read before you pick them up and examine them. It's pretty easy to know what's going on here. You're going to be picking up magazines, notes, pictures, fuses at one point. You're going to be picking up a bunch of just random crap like records as well. And all of this stuff is pretty easily identifiable. You're also not going to be fumbling through a menu at all, so you don't have your inventory to deal with. Everything's just kind of automatically used as you interact with different items. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to worry about your menu or anything, or not menu. You don't have to worry about your inventory or crazy stuff like that. All of the clues to solving many of these puzzles, you can tell what they are right away. Like this fuse puzzle, you need to get the fuses to add up to the number 70. Every fuse has a 5, a 20, or a 30 on it, so if you just use some basic math skills, you can get it done pretty quick. Aside from Peggy, the only other character you really see in this is the Whistling Man, so I can't really talk about the character models too much. Peggy is invisible for most of the game, or not really invisible, but you can't really make out any features at all. With the Whistling Man, he looks fine. It's kind of an interesting way of doing this, where you're just interacting with a small number of people. Some of the items were a little annoying to pick up, but for the most part, it was pretty easy to grab them and just move them around and figure out where they needed to go and that sort of thing. Overall, I really like the look of the game. It looks like the 80s, or at least, at the very least, it looks like how people remember the 80s. It's easy to see what you need to do and where you're going, and you really won't get lost in the game. The biggest weakness for this game is really that it isn't as scary as it probably could have been. And the biggest reason for that was there was no real sense of danger for the player's character. Or at least I never felt like there was a real danger to my character. I never really felt like the Whistling Man was going to break into the radio station and kill me. There was one moment where you have to go outside to get something, and then you end up leaving the entrance, like the back entrance to the radio station, open, and that's just kind of open for the rest of the game. But that never really resulted in anything until the very end. And even with that, I wasn't too worried that my character was going to get killed by the Whistling Man. So, yeah, I wasn't really feeling a sense of danger to any of this. The game does do a decent job of building up some tension or some urgency when you're trying to get people out of certain circumstances. But even with that, it wasn't so much I'm worried about injury to my character. It was more, I want to do this right because it's something the game is telling me I need to do right. You know, like that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's not as scary as it probably could be, but it has a whole lot of other fun stuff going on in it that, you know, made me enjoy it a lot more than some of the other games that I've played. Killer Frequency is one of the games that kind of slipped past me when it was first released. I might have heard about it on Twitter or something, but I'm kind of unsure at the moment. It shares some similarities with another game that I played called Rewind or Die. They both kind of lean on 80s and 90s nostalgia. However, I think Killer Frequency is a much better game than that one. Killer Frequency tries to be scary, but it just didn't really connect for me as well as some of the other horror games that I've played. The setting and the story are really good, but I just felt like more could have been done to make the game more frightening or something along those lines. I like this game. It is one of the better games that I've played this year, but I don't think it'll be in contention for my game of the year or anything like that. If they do make a sequel to this, I'll definitely check it out because I just like the idea of this killer that keeps returning to a town to seek revenge or something along those lines, or maybe they'll take it in a different direction if they do a sequel or something like that. The whole radio station thing was pretty cool, even if it was kind of a little bit ridiculous as far as logic goes. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye. Oh gosh, sorry, forgot all about what horror movie this might remind me of. I am going to probably go with a little bit of I Know What You Did Last Summer, and also I'm going to say My Bloody Valentine, Just because you have kind of those same things where like a prank goes wrong, someone dies, and then the person comes back or their relative comes back and they try to seek revenge. So one of those two movies I'm probably going to go with. Just because the person who was killed wasn't evil, so I'm ruling out Nightmare on Elm Street. And I don't really think Friday the 13th works all that well just because of the ending. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. What horror movie does this remind you of? I will talk to you all later again. Bye. I promise this is the last time. Bye.